You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. I'm Carolee Culpepper, and I'm here with our Executive Director, Dale Sellers. How are you this afternoon, Dale?
I'm so excited. We have a snowstorm coming.
I know.
We talked about it a little bit on the last podcast, but it's coming.
Yep.
We got a good one coming. We got our groceries today. I'm going tomorrow to get a load of firewood, and hopefully it'll be on the ground at least for 2 days.
You know, it's funny. Our neighborhood has like a Facebook buy and sell group. Mm-hmm. And so everybody's scrambling to sell all their old snow gear right now because it's, I guess, the best time to get rid of it. So
absolutely,
I scored a pair of mittens for $5 yesterday.
Gina and I I had to go mail some things, and all the listeners will love this. So the place that we go, the post office is actually inside the hardware store. So this is like Green Acres. Okay, so we go, and actually it's on Woodruff Road, which is a busy road, but they have a post office annex inside a hardware store. And
inside the Ace.
Yes, and that's where we were. And that they all of their sleds are gone. All their snow stuff's been sold. And it hasn't even snowed yet. So welcome to South Carolina, all of our listeners. This is just what it's like. But today our guests are not from South Carolina. They actually are from South Alabama. Actually, that's not true. I was going to say, but when you hear their accents, you'll know that they're from South Alabama. They're not. No, they're actually from the UK, across the pond. And we're talking today with our dear friends Lee Button and Chris Bright with Thinking Church, and we like to check in with them from time to time to find out what's happening in all things UK, and maybe go walk on Abbey Road with them and all that stuff. So, hey guys, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
Hello, yes. Here.
Nice to see you. And I have a sign that says Abbey Road.
I was just noticing that when he said that.
And I didn't even see it because I can't hardly see my screen, though, but that's a different story. We are glad to have you guys on today.
Mm-hmm.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having us.
So talk a little bit about what's happening in your life, Mr. Lee. Update us since the last time we talked to you. What's going on in the Button household?
Since the last time we spoke, that's trying to think now. So yeah, I mean, as ever, most of what we've done as a family and personally has been impacted by a lot of what we're seeing as the global events. So the COVID has been there underpinning lots of decisions and family stuff, and how that's changed school and education, affected work, affected kind of like the plans and travel. I've not been to America now for nearly 2 years. I mean, that's just a travesty.
I miss you, man. Carolee, when he comes to the US, he always stays at our house for a couple of days. In fact, he and Chris both stayed last time that they came, and we introduced them to some good Southern breakfast, and the boys ate some food. So anyway,
what was the verdict? Did you like it or not?
Loved it. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
So Chris, Chris, catch us up with you a little bit. What's happening in your life and your family?
Well, we also have been highly affected by an event that happens probably to every single person in their lifetime, chicken pox. In my family, my son is 3, Judah, and he has just got the chicken pox today. And then my daughter, Indy, who's 7, she had it last week. So we just feel like we're living in a kind of chicken pox world at the moment, post-Christmas.
Wow.
So it's one of those things you got to go through it, and every child goes through it hopefully at some point, and we're through that. So we're going through that at the moment, and it's fun. But we've had, apart from that, we've had a great Christmas, and I don't know what it's like for you guys over in the States, but here it's a little bit more open with COVID. You can move around and kind of do most things. We've got to put a mask on in our going into a shop, but that's about it. So it's not too much. So it's been pretty good the last few months or so.
Yeah, that's great.
Hey, I'm in South Carolina. It's not as bad. So we're not going to go into that. So talk a little bit about Thinking Church, guys. Give us a little update on what Thinking Church is and what you guys have been doing. And we want to kind of dive into some things that you guys are doing ministry-wise there, and just kind of let us know what's happening in the UK for Jesus.
Okay, so Thinking Church, really that was born out of a desire to just help where there's often a lot of things lacking, in kind of like we see people go and get trained for ministry and go and set up churches, but there's often a lot of that element that
doesn't underpin some of the things that are required in terms of governing and legal and those kind of requirements, anything through the back office aspects of when you actually come to work with community groups and run a church, before you even get to having buildings, which is another complication of the UK. We have lots of very old church buildings and we have small congregations in them, but we also have lots of churches who rent their space. They hire it on a weekend for doing their services. And so we set up Thinking Church to help facilitate good conversations around all of the topics of operating. So yes, there's the ministry side, but we also help people work, like on the church and in the church. And that's where Chris and I have this split between the kind of work that we both do. Chris is the guy that goes in and works kind of closely with teams and really gets into the nitty-gritty and implementation. And I've tended to do a lot more at kind of like you would say the board level, helping people think about the factors that affect how you might operate and the things that might be coming up that could affect how you run or how you're seen. So much more around the governance and that kind of thing that impacts ministry. So what we've seen,
that's so interesting.
Yeah,
because it seems like you said, ministers are trained to preach and minister, but all the other stuff isn't really there so much.
It's like a half-hour session about and there's also these things. And in the UK, as I'm, I know that there's a lot of similarities with the US, but most of our churches are also when they actually are gathered and register to actually be known as a church, actually become charities. And obviously that brings lots of financial inspection and other things and attributes of operating that are often unknown. And then you look for who you've got around you that you trust, and you bring in volunteers, and they're good people, but sometimes it's the little things, do we know or are we aware of the things that we don't know? And it's just to give that highlight and that feedback on better ways to think about things. And ultimately that you can probably do anything that you would like to do as long as it's documented properly. You have a written plan, you can communicate it well, and from there, are you also going to execute? But we've seen that change for a lot of the churches over this last couple of years, particularly because of COVID, has impacted people in such a way. There's been, haven't been able to hire venues, or you've got buildings that have less use. People's income has changed, and some people, lost jobs. And we had a lot of, when we were all isolating, I nearly said hibernating. I mean, that'd be an entirely different thing, wouldn't it?
That might have been easier.
Yeah, I mean, we should have all just gone and hibernated for a bit. When we were all, it went into the lockdown and people stayed home, and that, a lot of people had drops in wages and things like that as well. So there was a huge impact, and there was a ripple. And whereas, lots of larger organizations, as you even see commercially, all managed to ride it out or, got some help, there's always the little churches and those that are really community focused and have, loyal groups where they're making a deep impact on that level where it's more, there's a lot more one-to-one interaction, and it's often, you often see there's more vulnerable groups, or they've got projects that actually reach into communities in such a close way. They bore the brunt of some of those changes and things, and they're the ones that need the most help. And that's where Thinking Church gets involved. So we're not out to go and work with the the mega churches and at a level where as much as we'd never say no to them, actually it's about actually going and serving and getting content and resources into the hands and of all the people involved with making church happen, but predominantly in that smaller size. And small over here is probably, it's less than 150 in the congregation. In fact, we've dealt with some churches that are 30 to 50, and you're like, you're bordering that between being an individual ministry or project, but you're actually known as a church. So not only now are you small, but you've got all the trappings of something much larger. How do you cope with that? And that's where we enter in. But I'll let Chris talk a bit about how he's working with the teams and what he does within the churches and how that outworks.
Yeah, well, before I do, I can give you the quick story of how I met Lee, because that's kind of how Thinking Church started.
That would be real fun, yeah.
So I attend a church in my hometown of Gloucester, which is in the kind of southwest of England. And I was helping them out with strategy, and I was starting to get involved in that. And the kind of ministry that I was doing was starting to grow in that. And our church is multi-site, so we're trying to work out all of that stuff. And as I was trying to learn and grow in that, I came across the Unstuck group, and I downloaded a few of their materials, maybe one too many times, that I think they thought I was stealing their material. And so I had an email from a lovely gentleman there saying, "Hi, Chris, could you just notice you've downloaded things a few times? Could you just tell us about your church?" And so I kind of said, this is what I'm struggling with. And the guy said, you need to speak to Lee. And I'd followed Lee on Twitter because I'd heard, I'd started following all, you kind of do that when you're trying to find out all sorts of stuff. You follow people on Twitter. And so I followed Lee, and then it turns out, great. Okay. I think I've followed him. And so we met up, and then we just kept on meeting up because it seemed like there was a good synergy there, and there was a good kind of heart to help churches. And we just kept meeting up. And from there, Thinking Church was born. Is that how you remember it, Lee? I don't know if you remember it any differently to me.
Oh yeah, I remember this. I remember this persistent guy from Gloucester who just wouldn't leave me alone. Like, no.
Yeah, so Lee, what were you doing then? What were you doing when you guys first met? Obviously, Thinking Church didn't exist at that point, right?
Not right. By name. So yeah, so what I was doing at that point is I was working with churches and kind of like working out a way to kind of like bring that, to brand it so that it had something I could actually talk about.
Okay.
And it was one of those things where actually the moment you started doing that, I'd spent probably 6 months before that, which is just as I'd met Dale in that, I think that July was that point of like going, actually, you can't commit to grow something like that just as a one-man band. You need someone alongside and someone to help, and that's really what I was looking for. And I remember the first day that I met Chris, because it was one of those ones. It was really, really interesting because we met your senior pastor, obviously, and it was one of those, like, we walked in the room. This is how small things are over here. I know everybody thinks England is small. It really, really is. And I just got started like, oh, hello, Lee. Hello, Simon. Like, I happen to know the guy and have met him previously.
So, oh, wow.
But I was like, oh, okay. So I know something of the culture. I know something of what Chris is attracted to in all of this. So I've kind of got an idea of how it works, and just went away. And then it's sort of like, oh, shall we set up some coaching? Shall we do some stuff? And I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do. But it's just that thing on my heart. I was like, I really just don't think that I could call this a paid for service or, charge you for this. I really think you're the person that I should be building with. And that's what we set about doing. And for the first couple of years of it, that was me kind of putting in some vision, laying some of the framework, which was kind of more operational. And now actually Chris and I have kind of like swapped over a little bit, and now I'm underpinning it and taking kind of a role to just probably look after that aspect of the work that we're doing. And Chris is now going, right, but this is what I'm hearing on the ground. This is the resource we need to create. This is the content we need to create. And now we're getting into that detail. So we've got this really good cycle that goes between us of kind of like, where you cast out and then where you add the detail and you give it some more formation. So my memory of it was it was just a really fun day, and I came away thinking, I've had a day out and I've been somewhere, and that's probably the worst sale I've ever made, because I've come away and that's gonna cost me for that meeting. That's not coming back the other way. No, it's wholly additive. And it's that's where we've gone from since, as we've just looked to create content and tell our stories, and hopefully have some impact around the places that we're working.
That's cool. Chris, tell me a little bit about what's it like in the UK as far as just the culture and the people, not specifically the church, but we have our opinion here probably because we watch Downton Abbey. But other than that, I mean, we are with the Beatles, or what's it really like being living life in the UK? What's the atmosphere like?
Well, firstly, it's probably worth me saying I've never watched an episode of Downton Abbey.
Neither have I. That's the only thing UK I could think of.
So I
never watched it either.
No, I mean, I've obviously heard about it. We don't dress like that anymore. I think that's probably the first thing to say. I mean, it's such a hard question because I've lived in the UK for all my life, so I've never really known anything other than what it is, you know. And I think probably the best way to describe the UK, actually, I'd recommend a Twitter account which is called Very British Problems. And
I need to follow that.
So, and basically it just captures like British culture and British life to a T, which is basically a lot of sort of dour cynicism. We're quite cynical. We love to talk about the weather. That is actually true. We talk about the weather all the time because our weather is so odd. You know, it can be like bright sunshine one day, freezing cold the next day, and that's all just in May. You know, it's like it's so we love to talk about the weather. We do love to drink tea. It's absolutely true. I've had about 2 or 3 cups of tea today.
Got mine right here.
There we go. But we're also very, very picky about our tea. So we don't just, you know, you get very picky about how you make the tea. You can't do it the wrong way around. You can never put the milk in first. All those kind of. So it's a whole thing in the UK. And I think the other thing is we've got this kind of self-deprecating sarcasm as well. We do love to kind of talk ourselves down a bit. And I think that kind of is the British culture, really. We don't like anyone getting like too big for their boots. We're quite down to earth, really. I think that's probably sums up the UK pretty well.
I love that. What's family life like? I mean, it's, you know, are the families tight? Are they close? You know, is there a Christian influence? Is there not? I mean, you know, kind of what is that vibe?
So there's one thing for the UK and the size, and I think kind of like past history of. Although we've got fundamentals of a Christian faith, which probably, you know, still underpins much of like, you know, the legal system, we would probably say that, you know, at its roots is a Christian nation. There is much about the day-to-day because of the multicultural aspect of the UK now, where it's post-Christian in a sense, and definitely more of a setting where. Yeah, it's not popular and it's not common in how we speak about it. Yes, it's still you know, in schools, but alongside everything, you know, RE is a broad topic and subject base covering lots of different faiths and rituals and ways of working. So there's you know, that aspect of it. It's very, very mixed, but I think, you know, there's odd things that. Where our universities are situated and how people and education has got more in reach for, you know, a higher percentage of the population who go through education. People then with degrees tend to move away. There's a lot of geographically then displaced families as a result, but we don't think of travel the same way as you guys do in the US. So like you say, you know, we got in the car and you drive and you might drive 4 hours. Like that's not a common kind of journey in the UK. You know, going, you know, even 20 miles up the road is kind of like not always you know, the popular trip or the quick trip. So there's a lot of dispersed families and a lot of movement around that. So I think, you know, that's one of the big changes is just that the multicultural aspect. Faith isn't, you know, as there. It's not quite a point of saying, I would say, secular society, because there are still surveys out there. I think there was one, wasn't there, Chris, at the beginning of COVID that was put out there, and it was like, you know, percentage of the population who had turned to prayer during the early parts of COVID, and it was a really high percentage. So you've got that undercurrent, but I would say it's more an explored spirituality than it is about overt faith. So there's a lot of people who are looking for something and they outwork it, but would you recognize it as, you know, Christianity in a sense as, you know, we would talk about it in this here on the podcast? Probably not. And Chris can probably touch more on the kind of like demographic side of data, which I think, you know, you're unpicking. But, you know, family unit is the family unit is less than 2, which is a lot of, you know, split families, and, you know, single parenting is there's definitely been there's that's definitely a higher percentage now in the population. But yeah, I mean, Chris, you've looked at the figures on this, as you know, I think as recently as today.
Yeah, I know. I've been looking at demographic data quite a lot for the UK. And the UK, we have a census every 10 years, and our new census is due to come out in the spring. So we're kind of still waiting to see what the exact data is going to be. But we're definitely seeing the shift towards smaller families. I mean, the one thing you got to think about is that houses in the UK are a lot smaller than the US. So I live in a very nice neighborhood in Gloucester, which is a very sort of normal sort of middle class city really in the UK. And my house is very small compared to houses in the US. And also the other thing is that houses are really expensive for the size that you get as well. So what we've got is people growing up where it's really hard to get to a point where you can buy a house. In fact, you need to have some kind of family investment really to be able to buy a house. So getting on the housing ladder is really, really tough for people. And I think these things kind of do shape the landscape of how people think, what they believe. And Lee was right. There was a survey that came out that more people had started turning to prayer. And I think we've got to this point where, as Lee says, in terms of Christianity, we're very, very past sort of we're in the post-Christian phase, and it's kind of diluted down to where Christianity isn't thought about, but we still have this undercurrent of a Christian moral fabric that's in the society, which is really hard to sort of get rid of. There's a historian in the UK called Tom Holland, not that Tom Holland, another Tom Holland.
Spider-Man.
Not Spider-Man. Okay. I mean, if he did both, if he was a historian and an actor, brilliant. But no, he's a UK historian, and he talks about he talks about the moral fabric that we in the West and in the UK specifically have grown up with, and he would describe the UK as in every way Christian because of its moral fabric. He's not actually. I don't think he's actually a Christian himself, but it's hitting on that fact that actually, whilst the thought of attending church is still in decline. We don't really think about Christianity much in the UK, but there's this still this kind of bedrock of the moral framework and the moral fabric which is still there. And I think that's going to be interesting for churches moving forward, that actually there is something to build on. There is a kind of solid rock to build on, but it's a lot more building. There's not that cultural aspect where it feels like going to church is part of life anymore.
Are you guys seeing any kind of like signs of growth as far as like, the Christian movement, or, people getting more interested? I know like kind of around here, I don't know, Dale, what do you think? The last 10 years kind of church in some aspects has really started to grow a little bit more than it was.
It was, and then we had COVID and I want to ask you some questions in that arena in a minute, but what are you guys seeing?
I think what I'm seeing is, so the odd thing that we do see when we're working at a denominational level is there's always this idea that people are going to church plant. Okay, so there is a lot of church planting, but it is not outpacing churches closing. Okay, and there's various reasons for that, and there's one of them I see is that. And I think, Dale, you and I have talked about this at length over a coffee every so often, is senior pastors staying in position too long with no idea of how to have good succession. But they've also been let adrift by the framework around them, and there's no provision for them to age well or retire well. So they're almost dependent on staying in position to have any form of income and any form of support. What that does is then where the younger guys are coming up who maybe have some aspiration to do it differently or see things, they don't get that position or ability to do that in the church they're in. So they leave and will plant, and then the other church will die. And so we see where one closes and another starts, but it's not outpacing each other. So it's just kind of like, it's a zero gain on in that sense. But what I have seen the last couple of years, and probably even the year, in fact, there's probably a year, if you look back now, there was a bit more the boldness in smaller churches in particular, and one or two of the larger organizations that probably encompass lots of small churches. So, not like a mega church on its own, but like a denomination that's made up of lots of small churches and then small churches on their own. One thing that I am seeing time and time again is a bit more daring to innovate. So rather than it being specifically about, is there church growth, is actually, no, we're seeing people actually get very narrow in their focus on what they want to do and are daring to actually go after that with literally everything they've got and all their resource, but to innovate on how to do it. So we're not seeing the traditional models of it's always on a Sunday at 10 and there's another one at 4, or, you've got this one here. Actually, people are doing things midweek. People are doing things on other nights. People are bringing them in cafes. People are doing them in many different settings. And there's kind of just a different take on how to do something that engages, but definitely trying to build community first. So they're looking around, shared interest. They're looking at ways that you build it up. And I would say that innovation is actually there in its kind of genesis, but it is ahead of any growth specifically that we're seeing. Because I think elsewhere, for what you see spike, where you hear good stories, there's always the other side where we're seeing some decline. But the innovation piece that's coming through and is daring to do something different is definitely on the rise in the UK.
That's really encouraging. Do you think that innovation will lead to growth eventually?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, is that people are beginning to realize, and maybe this is a positive of COVID. When it really came to it and we were like, right, you can't meet, shut your doors, everybody became an innovator overnight.
Mm-hmm. A forced innovator.
Yeah. But oddly, it was that some of the small churches who could react quickest, because they're already held together by simpler systems and simpler structures just by sheer resource. They didn't have to try and turn the whole ship. They were literally just like on a dime, turning it as quick as they could. But we saw them all of a sudden go, oh, what we did this week was changing by the week after. So they changed. Now their mindset says we can change and we no longer fear it. And that's where we're seeing innovation. So that's what I'm going to say for the positive out of this season, couple of years of it being absolute upheaval. I'm seeing more people dare, less fear of failure, and ability to kind of risk well, but take that learning and keep changing. And people generally, as a result, are on the whole more adaptable and are willing to do that. But I think now it's the boldness to right, you get so far. And it's to build a culture takes, was it 3 years, but to fall back takes 30 days. We're still in that thing where if we get there and they open the doors again, everyone's going to try going back to what we had. We just need that bit more to keep pushing. But I believe the growth will come as a result, because it's any level of pruning is going to bud. And that seems to be where we're at, I believe. I don't know, Chris, go on, Chris, do you agree?
I want to ask Chris a specific question that kind of piggybacks with that. So here in the U.S., our football stadiums are packed, our malls are packed, our concerts are packed. Pretty much everything in society is packed. Our churches are not. As a general rule, in the U.S., at least 30% of people have not come back, and that is not even a trend anymore. It's just kind of what it is. What are y'all seeing? Because I think you weren't freed up is not the right word. You weren't able to start meeting as quickly. And I think if I remember, you guys had more restrictions. But what are you seeing now as the restrictions are lifting or lightening up? Are people coming back? What are you seeing?
So what I'm seeing is, there's so many similarities with the US and the UK. We had the same thing where people weren't coming back as quickly. But the thing I've noticed, it's been in my own church, but then other churches that I've seen as well, is that when the churches have been able to come back in person, is what you're seeing is new people coming to church. As in people who
keep hearing.
We've heard this. Yeah, we keep hearing this.
And it's actually the people that have been around the congregation for, a decade or more, they're the ones that are not coming back and may not come back. And I find that so fascinating, because it's just not what I would have expected. I would have expected that would have had like, you know, the exact opposite. But I think it's real. I think it's, for me, that's really encouraging, because I don't think a church is there just to, you know, just keep people together. It's there to do the work of the gospel, obviously,
Sure.
which is the most, you know, that's the important thing. And I think there's some times where, you know, in any church life, that it can be something where the people in the congregation, it can become cultural Christianity in a kind of subcultural level. And so that's going to happen. You're going to get that drop off, because they're going through the same thing that people have actually been through in society for decades beforehand. But now what you're getting is there's actually, I think there's this growing need and sense for something that's, people want something that's bigger than themselves, but they also are looking for something that is like something stable and secure in life. COVID has obviously, you know, created massive upheaval, but the kind of, you know, looking culturally, the rise of kind of postmodern thought, I think, is creating a, you know, it's a new wave of something that's coming in, but it's creating an upheaval in people because they don't quite know where anything stands anymore, and so they're looking for something secure. And I was interestingly, you know, hearing Lee talk about what he's seeing in the church. What I'm seeing in the church is that the areas of growth are often within the Church of England, which is the, you know, the Anglican Church would be for the US, but in the UK, that's the, you know, that's the biggest denomination. It's the state-run church, really. Yeah. And it's because there's actually there's been this interesting crossover of churches from the Anglican Church that have kind of taken on a Pentecostal charismatic edge to them. So they'll be most known by Holy Trinity Brompton, who started the Alpha course. So that they would be the kind of archetypal church. And they've seen actually incredible growth over the last few years, because I think what they do is they capture this thing of something that's modern, fresh, relevant, which is great, but also this thing it's connected to something bigger and deeper, and there's a ritual behind it.
Yep.
And I think there's this need, I think people are sensing that whilst the whole sort of fabric of society and everything's getting questioned at the moment, and there's the good and bad behind that, of course, but people are wanting that sense of ritual, and to be part of something that's ingrained, something that's got history to it and connection to it. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. There's this kind of shift, as we've seen in culture, and I think it's going to continue to change. And I think the church is well placed to be able to take advantage of it.
The Anglican Church is actually there's a little bit of a rumblings in the U.S. that it's kind of, it's beginning to make somewhat of a comeback. It's very interesting to see, because at 95 Network, we get to work with so many different denominations, and it's interesting to see. And I think you're spot on. I think people are looking for something to hold on to, which brings me to a question that I thought of a few minutes ago. I want to ask both of you. How did you come to Jesus? How did you become a believer? What led to that? What about you, Chris?
I'll go first. So I, both my parents are Christians, and I grew up really in a very Christian home. I went to an exceptionally Christian school, which I now joke about, because it was very Christian in the fact that it wasn't like a Church of England school, which you have lots of them in the UK, you know, and they would be, you'd think of that as a Christian school in the UK. But no, I went to one which had an American education. And so I know more about American history than UK history, which is so bizarre. So I grew up in that, like, almost like, you know, you look back and you think it's a bit odd, really. And I just grew up in that environment where it was very, very strong Christian ethic all the way through my life. You know, going to church was always part of it. But actually, for a lot of people that grow up in that environment, they often walk away from it.
Yeah, they reject it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know so many stories of people that went to the school I went to, and you know, and they've just rejected it in their 20s or 30s. They got to university, or they reached, you know, the age of 30, and they thought, what was I doing with my life? And for some reason, I think for me, I always had, I'm a worship leader, is like kind of my primary thing. That's how I got, what really captured me, you know, at the age of 15 and 16. And so whilst I'm one of those kind of weird people where I can kind of pinpoint me becoming a Christian about the age of 4 or something like that, and just all throughout I've kind of always had those moments. So it's sometimes hard. I've just kind of grown up in it, And I always had those I've had a few moments where, you just go, yeah, this is what this is who I'm passionate about, what I'm passionate about. This is this is who I want to orient my life around. And so that's how I kind of came to the Lord, really. And definitely through my teens, I started to get involved in worship and just had those amazing moments where God is just so real to you, and you just experience God's in a sort of, they're holy moments. I think it's probably the only way you can describe them, and it just sort of changes you. So that's kind of how I became a Christian. I think Lee's story is entirely different, which I
cannot wait to hear. Let's go, Lee.
So yeah, my story is definitely entirely different to that. So I was not raised Christian or in a Christian home, but the nature of the small town where I grew up meant that you were involved in church activities, because that was one of the things in the day, the kind of like, the Sunday school thing, especially for my age, that was still a thing when we were younger. So I had I knocked along and was part of, in and out of like church activity, and some church stuff is kind of like up till about, probably 11, 12, something like that. But after that, had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But there was some underpinning. And because it was a small town, my schools were Church of England schools. So we still had, your typical religious assemblies, Easter, Good Fridays, and Harvest Festival kind of things, all of those kind of stuff. So I became a Christian. I was 20. I was at university, and actually I was away in Amsterdam with two friends at the time. And mine was a supernatural experience of Jesus impacting a situation. So my friends and I, we had gone to Amsterdam typically as people probably around that university age. It was, we were out there for the experimentation and the fun and all the things that would deliver. And so we'd actually been taking drugs. And so that was where the experience started. But what happened is we got back to the hostel where we were staying, and I watched one of my friends have a really bad reaction to what he'd taken. And I saw him start to hallucinate. He got really wild. He was trying to jump out the window. And then I was like, oh man, this is really, really bad. And then my second friend started to have a very similar experience, at which point it dawned on me that I've not had this yet. And so I'm like, this is going to happen to me, because it's happened 1, 2, all three of us did it. This is going to be my experience. And I started to feel this horrible effect. And I was watching my friend and watching my first friend, and his hallucinating and how bad it was going, and he was really reacting to things that weren't there, and it was really terrible. And I was like, I've got no idea what to do. And I laid down. I was in really bad pain at this point, and I was like, I've just got no idea like how this is going to go, what's going to go out. And I was absolutely scared. I was at my wit's end. And I just decided I was going to cry out to God, and I've got no idea why that was my choice or what that was at that moment. But I just cried out, and I was like, God, if you are there and this is something, you are real and this is a thing, then like help me from this situation. I mean, it was a selfish request at that point. I asked for myself, not for anybody else. I was like, help me out of this situation. And I'm going to come for you. I'm going to come and find out what that looks like and see what this would be. And I mean, I firmly believe that was Jesus in the room at that point. Like my experience was supernatural, and I was sober in a split second. I had absolute clarity.
Wow.
I was able to attend to my friend who had started to fit and was really, really unwell. So I basically was able to intervene and stop that situation being worse. I mean, it's like, did it save his life? You don't know what that was going to play out as, but I was able to intervene. And I was able then to look after my other friend as well. And I just came out of that going, I did not have the experience that the two experienced. And I believe this is because Jesus entered in. And it was a proper, filled with light, kind of like, this is odd, what's happening here, who else is here? And then I spent 7 months after that dipping my toe into trying to find church and understand it, because what I wanted was like, no, this experience I've just had of a direct and kind of like real connection that I thought was that was Jesus with me, was also not what I was seeing in some of the churches and places that I was then looking and trying to connect it. And so like, yeah, that's been my journey the whole time. It's like, it was a supernatural entry, and that's still a basis of my faith today. Is that actually it's the experience piece. It's where Jesus enters in. It's what he can do to redeem any situation. But yeah, that was my experience as like 20 years old, and how I came to faith.
Wow.
That's
cool. Incredible.
Do you find that the churches that you guys work with are lacking in belief or faith that God can do incredible things?
I don't think so. Lee might disagree with me, but the churches I think there's faith there, and I think that even in denominations where you think, okay, is that something where faith is going to be a harder thing for them to come across? I've not actually noticed that. I think that there are churches that really want to make a significant difference in their locality and their town, and often that's they might only say, I want to make a difference in the street that we're in, but there is great faith within that, and all ages as well. There are people that we've helped churches that have got a predominantly more elderly congregation, and there's still great faith in there. They want to do something in the community, even when they may not have seen things in the past. They've still got this incredible faith about them. And then I'm helping churches that are more in the kind of skew younger, and actually they want to do, they're not resting on their laurels. They really have got a passion to see God move, and so I think there's faith. I think there's
very encouraging.
It's obviously
encouraging, man. That's really good.
It is encouraging. Yeah, I think that, obviously there's going to be stories where that's not happening. And but I think and often it's churches that will give us a call because they want to do something, and so I'm aware of that. You don't call us because you want to stay where you are, and if you're not feeling faith-filled, you're not going to call Thinking Church. So I'm aware of that, but I think what I've seen, I'm really encouraged.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think that's on the whole. I think it would be like, if I do now liken that to my own situation, there's a lot of churches that maybe have got lots of faith, but have also got a bit downbeat or tired, and they don't know. And what they find is that it's been a little bit too long now. I'm 44. And I don't want to be talking about the experience I had when I was 20 of a faith moment of something happening in my life. Some churches realize that actually they have the faith, but they're still talking about a story that was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago plus, because of something that they had. And what they feel that they've done is that then they almost protect that moment because it was significant. And they all kind of crowd around it. And then that's when you get the plateau. Now we create programs and services and things that kind of keep people where we're at. Yeah. And they don't, it's like what takes us through that barrier and goes up to that next level. So like Chris alluded to this earlier when he said, churches, it's the people who've been in the church 10 plus years that aren't coming back to church after COVID. But I'm like, actually, that's the sign that we actually didn't get to a point where they've actually got any maturity. What they've done is that when it was feeding them, they only came for what was feeding them, and it was the programs and all of everything else that we did. So they were consumers of what was going on, but they're sometimes unable to do things for themselves. It's giving room for those people who are genuinely seeking, and those who have got the maturity, who've going up through that process, who now at the top, they're no longer the consumer. They are now somebody who can create and actually create opportunity for others to encounter. And I think that's the thing. It's just where some of those are tired. But generally, I think people they are recognizing it. And it's like, no, it's been too long since we've had something. But it's to get out of protecting those moments and actually go after new experiences and inviting God into what we're doing. But then you've got to be brave, because actually, if you invite God into what you're doing, be prepared, because that could look wholly different. And then we fear the change and we fear what that means. This is what I said. I think this is where it's innovation and things that's going to capture the heart of where this is going and what's going to happen next.
So good. So tell me, where is Thinking Church going next? Chris, you were telling us before we started recording about some things you have coming up. Kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm delighted tomorrow to be helping a denomination in the UK, and I'll be working with their Ministers in Training program. And what that means is that I will get to basically have a free evening to just kind of help them think a bit differently. So all their ministers that are kind of, they're learning the ropes, and I'm going to come in and just help them think differently. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them not thinking about theology or anything like that, but thinking about strategy. And specifically, I'm going to do a piece of them around target market, which I mean, it's a horrible phrase, but I can't think of a better one. I think I've heard mission field as well. I quite like mission field, so maybe I'll do that one. But I think I'd confuse too many people. But basically, who does your church exist to reach? And that's the question. Now, the exercise that we're going to do is that I'll throw them a whole lot of demographic data, as I do love a bit of demographic data. I love a good stat. And so I've got the latest census, which is actually not very late, which is it's 10 years ago. And we use that, but it's an exercise. It's not the point at the moment. And so they're going to use that, and as well as some electoral information. And I've given them a random city in the UK, like Salcombe. It's not a city. That's about 1,000 people live there. Or Leicester, Newcastle upon Tyne, these kind of places. And now they have to work out from there, like what kind of people are living there. And then they've got to take that and then turn that from demographic data into psychographic data, which is basically marketing speak for what do people like, what do they want, what's their beliefs, things like that. And so you're using I'm getting to them to think about their experiences, so people that they've met in their life, and it's called inductive reasoning, which I really like that phrase, inductive reasoning, because you've got to use more than that. You're drawing some general conclusions from your life experience, people I've met who are this age and are a bit like this, and you're using that. And what I want to try and direct people is this is not kind of anything to do with like creating stereotypes, because that's all about stereotypes are about judgment, and we're not trying to do judgment. We're not trying to say you're like this. What we're trying to say is we're trying to serve people, and to serve people, we want to get to know people and to know them really, really well. And I'll use the illustration of Acts chapter 2, which in Acts chapter 2, the Holy Spirit enables the disciples to speak in the language of the people that were there. So they say, we hear them speaking in our language. Yep. And I think that it's so important for the church to learn to speak in the language of the people that you're called to reach. And I believe that's a Holy Spirit enabled thing. We don't just do it on our own, that the Holy Spirit will give us wisdom, and he will give us insight as to who we should be reaching and what do they believe. And if we really kind of grapple with those things, then it will help shape our program, which is going to be the last part, which is, okay, well then, with all that in mind, if we've looked at some psychographic data, what car would they drive, and what TV shows would they watch, and what's their, what problems are they facing in life, and what are their aspirations and things like that. Lastly, get onto, okay, well, what day would you do a service? Would you do it on a Sunday, or would you change it? What time would you do it? What would be some preaching series ideas that you would do to help someone like that, to serve someone like that? And it's just so that's the idea, to try and get people just completely thinking differently, and to and I love that kind of thing. And it's I've done it before and helped a smaller group before to do it, and it was so fruitful, because they think entirely differently. And I think if we can do that, then that's an absolute win.
I love that you guys are just really pushing for the innovation and the new ideas and being open to different things. I mean, for me, even thinking about, moving church from Sunday to a different day, that just seems so weird, but also great. I mean, it could be great. So I love that. Just thinking outside of the box. As we wrap up today, I wanted to ask you guys, though, what gives you hope for the future, or the future of Thinking Church also?
Ooh. Lee?
It's so a lot of this is based around the feedback So we get feedback, and the ones that give me hope, not only for the work we do, but the direction that we're setting, is we've been and worked with churches and we've been and worked with people. And then every so often you get an email in or a phone call come in that says, I listened to this on a podcast or read this on an article, or we heard you on this radio show, and this unlocked this for me. About what we're trying to do. And as a result, we're now doing something that we wouldn't have considered otherwise. And I'm like, actually, it's that element of, we don't always think about the second order element of it, or where people just feel something ignite within themselves. So my hope is in that the content actually is, it's where it's in conversation and gossiped out, that actually it's reaching to people that we wouldn't even have guessed that it would be having an impact on.
Right.
And so we've had a couple of totally left field, bookings for a free session that have booked in, and we've gone, I can't believe that they even got hold of us or heard us or saw anything about us. And you're like, actually, it's making a difference. And as a result of then somebody committing to that, people are going to be impacted and encounter Christ. So yeah, that's my hope.
Chris?
That's great.
Yeah, similarly, I'm thinking of a church that contacted us, and they heard of us through the kind of national Christian radio station in the UK, and they just said, we just don't want to go back the same as we were before. And I think, that gives me real hope, because I think there's churches all over the UK that just don't want to go back the same as they were before, and they believe that there's actually something more than where they are. I think the other thing that gives me hope is, I alluded to it earlier, and I think we're in this interesting cultural moment where we're coming to the end of modernism and we're heading into postmodernism. And I think, there's all of the, is that right? Is that not right? And we can argue that until the cows come home. But in reality, wherever there's a change, I think the gospel has an opportunity, because actually I think that it's going to need fresh ideas, it's going to need fresh vision, it's going to need fresh strategy, because now we're having to, you can't meet the challenge of postmodernism with modernism. In fact, we weren't supposed to meet the challenge of modernism with modernism. We were supposed to meet the challenge of the modernism and postmodernism with the kingdom and with a kingdom culture. And I think that how you do that, it's different for different ways that you work it out. And that means that we've always got this shifting, the strategy has always got to change, because the world is constantly changing. But obviously the message of Christ is unchanging. So that's what keeps me encouraged, I think, is and what gives me hope for the future as well, is that we're heading into a time where every church is going to soon realize that they've got to make some kind of change, and I just, my passion is to be there just to help as many churches as I can in the UK grapple with that change and move forward into it.
That's
fantastic.
Really good. So as we wrap up, I wanted to tell you guys something that happened this week. I had a fella call me up and ask me to be on his podcast, and I've known this guy. Good gracious, man, I hate saying this stuff now because I'm getting so old. I've known him 30 years probably. And so he's hosted me on his podcast, and we're hanging out and we're talking, and it was a really good podcast. And then when we finished up, he said, I need to tell you something. He said, you don't know this, but my wife and I committed into ministry 30 years ago because of you. And I'm just like, wow. They were in we'd done a mission trip to Trinidad, and we did all this pre-work, and I did all this pre-training. And out of that, they made a decision to give their lives into full-time ministry, and they're still doing it. And that was very encouraging to me. And I shared that because I want you guys to understand, you have no idea the impact you're making. You just don't have any idea. You don't have any idea how much you are making a difference. And you've shared some things today that are very hopeful. To be very honest with you, we're not hearing as much hope in the circles we're working in right now as you guys have kind of shared today. And so I hope that our listeners today will go, wow, man, if God's doing a great work in the UK, we hear he's doing a great work, underground work in, in other countries around the world. It's all about Jesus. And I think, the cool thing is, our hope is built on nothing less. You know what I'm saying? He is it. And so, guys, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for being our friends. Thanks for staying at my house when you come to the U.S. In fact, I'll tell you what we'll do next time you come. If you can make it work, you can do dinner. Gina and I and Carolee and David will take you guys to the Peddler, and we'll have like a nice big old steak together.
This is Dale's favorite spot.
Sounds good.
Lee knows about it.
I'm in.
I'm in. So, guys, keep doing what you're doing. If we can do anything at all to help you from 95 Network's perspective, don't hesitate to reach out. And it's just great to see our brothers across the pond. And so keep on doing what you're doing.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.